I'm making this recording in order to put down a marker about a walk I did in 2018. I walked on this walk from the furthest south in Wales to the furthest north. I just want to make sure that I'm historically correct in that I am the first person to attempt to do this in this particular way. Now, there is a walk that goes roughly from where I finished at Llanlleiana Head to Chepstow, but this is not the walk that I was doing. That walk was called by the long distance walking group Walking Wales End to End. This walk started because me and my cousin Simon Rhoose had walked across the centre of Wales from a place called Llanlleiana on the English border to Aberystwyth, and we did that within 24 hours. It was not quite the absolute shortest dimension of Wales because there is a shorter distance path that other people have been doing, but this one was pretty much the shortest distance across Wales following an east-west bearing. Having done that, I thought, what am I going to do next? And so I thought, why not try and walk along the longest dimension of Wales that is the longest dimension that's reasonably taken on walkable land? And so I drew a line from Rhoose Point near Cardiff to Llanlleiana Head in Anglesey, which is the longest line you can fit into inhabited Wales. The actual furthest north in Wales is a little island just off Llanlleiana Head called Mouse Island, and the furthest southern part of administrative Wales is Flatholm in the Bristol Channel, but these weren't particularly practical places for me to go to or devise a walk from. Now, if you attempted to walk dead straight along that line, you'd come across all sorts of barriers. You had hedges, roads, private land. You'd be going straight through the middle of houses, and so I actually had to find reasonable footpaths in order to do the distance. And when I plotted that out, it came to 208 miles. In fact, when I did the walk was longer than that, but the length of the walk is not the important bit. When you do a walk like this and are planning it, the first thing you've got to work out on the straight line that you've plotted is where you can bridge rivers or get over other sorts of obstructions. So the first one, for instance, the barrier I had to get across was the M4, and I found a footbridge across that near Llanharry. The Afon Rheidol, or the Rheidol River Gorge at Devil's Bridge, is also another place where one needs to find a crossing point, and that actually did prove quite difficult. In order to do this walk, I did survey some things, and this was one thing I tried to look at and see if I could actually cross the Rheidol near Devil's Bridge. As it happens, you can't. I went down on this path, on which you pay £1 in a slot machine. It allows you to view the very spectacular scenery down in the bottom of the Rheidol River Gorge. It proved so steep it was just impractical without ropes. So even to get down to the river was too difficult, and so I had to go round to the north of Devil's Bridge to a place called Parsons Bridge. Another place you have to get across is the River Dyfi near Aberdyfi or Machynlleth. There is a possible way on foot if one was to trespass on the railway at Dyfi Junction, where there's a bridge, which is fairly close to the straight line, which you can see plotted in pink on my map. But I decided that wasn't really a practical proposition because not only is there a £1,000 fine for trespassing on the railway, but also there is an osprey nest which is very closely monitored. You can actually see it from the station. It's a bit like a tower with a platform, and the ospreys nest every year. So I thought sneaking across the bridge was not really practical, so I had to go round via Machynlleth. So that was probably the furthest I had to go off my straight line. Barmouth is easily accessible from Fairbourne by the railway bridge because there's a footbridge that runs alongside it. The other place you need to get across is the Dyriw Estuary, which is near Porthmadog and Portmeirion. Now, I've walked all the way around the coast of Wales, and when I came to that part there was no footbridge that I could cross, and so I had to get the train. This took me for one stop from Llandequin to Penrhyn Dwydrath. I couldn't at that point say I've walked on absolutely every part of the coast around Wales, but as a result of this walk I have done so, because they built a new bridge with pedestrian access, so that solved that problem. When we come to the Menai Straits, I did think, well, obviously I can walk around via the Menai Bridge, the 19th century suspension bridge. And even a bit closer to my straight line, there's the Britannia Bridge. But the Britannia Bridge doesn't actually have a pedestrian walkway. So you'd probably have to sneak across it, and that's probably quite dangerous. It should be physically possible, but I decided against it. So what I did was, I decided I'd try and hire a boat and go across to a place called Mermaid Quay from Carnarvon. And wonders of the internet meant that I discovered this chap called Derek Jones, and he said, yes, he would take me across. It would cost me about £50. Now, it's not very far, but I thought, well, £50 is a night in a bed and breakfast. And if I had to go around via the Menai Bridge, then that would take me an extra day. I decided that the boat crossing was a good option, and so I booked him to do the trip. Having plotted my straight line and then plotted the reasonable route to walk along, it ended up that my maximum deviation from the straight line was 4 3/4 miles east at Machynlleth. The walk starts at Rhoose Point, which is just very close to Cardiff Airport, and conveniently there's a sign, and the sign identifies this as being the furthest south point in Wales. So the first thing you encounter is Cardiff Airport as you set off. You have to get round that, and then it's across very pleasant rolling countryside with nice little villages and farms and things like that. It's a fairly standard bit of Welsh countryside, this. You go through the wonderful little Hensel forest, and it's very easy walking across well-marked footpaths. It was about 17 miles this first day, and I stayed at the High Corner Hotel, and then the next day I went up over the hill where there were lots of wind farms to enter what were called the Welsh Valleys. Welsh Valleys are quite interesting. They're like quite a lot of it's about 5 streets wide, which run for maybe 20 or 30 miles. Quite different to much of the rest of the country. And then they're surrounded by these beautiful hills. This is the Rhondda Valley, and it's quite a steep climb out, but the path was very good, so it was quite easy to get out of there. And again, you go onto the tops. And it's open countryside. There are wind farms in the distance. So after half a day walking across this open countryside, you get to Llanlleiana, which has got a very large open cast coal mine. I took my sketchbook and I did a few sketches. Spent time in the pub, and then on the next day set out across the Brecon Beacons. As we progress on the walk, it gets increasingly isolated with fewer and fewer communities. Villages of 2 or 3 houses, not that much agriculture. And this part, which is an old Roman road, is fairly bleak, but it's quite a low pass, so gets you over the Brecon Beacons. And then again we come into a valley which is a bit more heavily populated. Still only farms and hardly anything that you would call a village in this particular part. and by this time I got to a place called Tricastle where I stayed. Did a sketch out the window of the hotel, and next day we went over to the Senny Bridge military range. That had been a problem for me because when I tried to find out about it, the rights of way that were marked on the map in fact were not allowed by the military, and I had to take the Epint way to get to where I wanted to be. It wasn't that much of a diversion, but it was a problem. And then as you can see here, there's a blue line, and the blue line indicates where I plotted to go, but I actually made a mistake on the map and had to go round through some forests because I'd plotted my way down a county boundary and not a footpath. Coming up here we come to Mynydd Trowsnant, and it was an incredibly clear day. I could see for probably 40 miles in each direction. And then up a branch of the Llanlleiana to arrive at the very convenient for me Dolgoch Youth Hostel. The next day we went up into the Towie Forest. Now there's a very large amount of forestry in this part of Wales, and there's a lot of forestry activity, but although we're passing across the Cambrian Mountains, it wasn't particularly difficult walking. Some of it open and some of it through forests. Then we come down into a rather pretty little valley which contains Strata Florida, although I didn't actually visit it. Now we come to the next big navigational problem, which was Devil's Bridge, which I told you I couldn't get across the Rydal River and had to go round via Parsons Bridge, which is an extremely steep climb out from, and I've done it 3 times and I've not enjoyed it any of the times I've done it, but it has to be done to do both the Cross Wales route and the longest distance route. Coming up off the Aberystwyth Road into the forest again, we get to the Nant Moch Reservoir, which is just under Llanlleiana. Again through more forests. There's an awful lot of forest on this. I could hear cuckoos quite often when I was walking through. And then down to a place called Glas Pwll, which is a very pretty little place on the way into Machynlleth, where I stayed for a rest day. After Machynlleth, went up over the hills. It was beautiful weather, and in fact I was having really beautiful weather. I had walked so far and there was been no rain, and it turned out there was going to be no rain for the rest of the walk, which for a walk across Wales I thought was exceptional. And then before you get to the coast you go over this mountain called Traws Fynydd, which means in Welsh mountain crossing, to a place called Fairbourne. Fairbourne is not all that easy to get to by car, but for me it has this bridge which goes by the railway to Barmouth. After Barmouth I decided to change my route. Instead of going inland, I decided to take the coast path. It's not that much further, and of course it's all low and flat, so it's fairly fast walking. After Shell Island, I went along the sea wall to get to Harlech, which is extremely spectacular and got very good views above Harlech. And then we come to the Durrow River estuary, which has got Port Meirion on it and Porthmadog. To cross that, I went across the railway and motor and pedestrian bridge to Penrhyn Dwydrath. When I got to Porthmadog, there was no accommodation available because it was a beautiful Saturday and there was just nothing left, and so I ended up by staying in somebody's camper van, which worked out all right, but it was not what I had planned. Snowdonia was the hardest thing for me, I think, although it's not particularly high, it's fairly rough country, and so I struggled my way up this pass, and then when I got to the top, not only was I tired, but I couldn't find the path down, and so I had to do this wide diversion. If you look at the blue line, that's what I planned, but I had to go down into the valley and diverted that way. It was very pretty though, and there were some good views at a place called Carmel. For the first time I could see Anglesey. And then to stay in Carnarvon, which is a very pleasant town. After crossing the Menai Straits, the land is really flat, and it was a very simple and easy half-day's walk to Llangefni, which was the next place I was going to stay at. Llangefni, by the way, is where the Oriel Ynys Môn, or the Isle of Anglesey Gallery, situated. I do recommend it if you ever get to Llangefni, because it's got some wonderful things in there. The next day, going out of Llangefni, the path is all right until you get to the end of Llangefni, and then it's road from there on to the coast. And from my point of view, that was not good news, because it started to blister my feet, which I had no blisters up until then. But the roads were busy and small and difficult. Llanlleiana was near where Thornbury Ramblers Club, which I'm a member of, had a holiday week, and I did a drawing of Snowdonia while I was there. And then we get to the coast, and the coast is a very different part of Anglesey to the rest of it. This north coast is quite rugged, although not in fact very high. Try not to fall off a cliff, Bobby. Right, keep going. That's about as far as I want to go, I reckon. So when we were in South Wales, we could actually stand on the sea, but I think that's about as far as I want to go. That one doesn't go anywhere, that one doesn't go anywhere. I'm going back up the top. So I've made it, and of course you can see I need a bit of foot repair, Now the hard bit is going to be getting back to Carnarvon. By the time I'd finished, my GPS had been carried for 247 miles, though 5 miles of that were from Llanlleiana Head to Amlwch, so that doesn't really count. Even though you plot the distance, even though you do the straight line, the actual walking is further, just because there are little kinks in the path you don't plot, or you plot a straight line on a curve and all that kind of stuff. In conclusion, I think I'm the first person to have attempted to walk between the furthest apart points within the Principality of Wales. And if you think you can find a longer dimension, then please tell me. I tried very hard in all sorts of different directions, and this is the longest straight line distance you could possibly do. Of course, it does mean you have to cross the Menai Straits, and Anglesey is a separate island, but I think that was reasonable. Although it all could have been done on foot, I liked the boat solution.